Money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods in for Peter Schiff. Hope you're having a great Monday morning. We got a couple excellent guests coming your way later this hour. However, I want to kick things off with a news item that has been burdening me the entire weekend, and now I'm going to impose it on you poor souls. Breaking late last week, a poll from Public Policy Polling telling us what likely Republican primary voters are thinking. That always makes me nervous, what these people are thinking. And I think we all know who is leading potential presidential contenders. It's Donald Trump. Donald Trump is crushing the competition. He's got 26% of those polled supporting him. Now, Trump, let's remember, Trump actually sent money to Hillary Clinton. Is that a common thing a lot of potential Republican nominees are doing? But all is forgiven because he's well-spoken and they think he might be able to beat Obama. These people don't even know what it is they want to win for. They just want to win. Doesn't even matter. Doesn't even matter to them anymore. I mean, not to mention he's got nationalistic economic views, which would be pretty much a disaster. He seems to have fairly inchoate views on pretty much everything. He has had, very conveniently, I don't mean to be cynical about a man's religious experiences, of course, but I suppose the Holy Spirit moves in mysterious ways, but just interestingly, right on the eve of the Republican primary, who am I to say? But there it is, Donald Trump, who then told us, he supported John McCain, by the way, came back onto the plantation, supported John McCain, said John McCain is going to be a great president. Now, we all get a little carried away, I suppose, during the election cycle, but a great president, I mean, John McCain up there on Mount Rushmore, it's going to be George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and John McCain. I mean, I think most people, John McCain's own family members, their view was, well, look, we'd probably slog through all right with the guy. But Dick Morris and Donald Trump were of the opinion that this is going to be a great, great man. And now we have to believe Trump when he says he doesn't want to be the policeman of the world, which that's who McCain is. I mean, he's as bellicose as can be. He would have changed absolutely nothing with regard to spending. He was proposing buying up trillions of dollars worth of mortgages. And this Trump is super enthusiastic about this guy, and Republicans are on board with him. It's just hopeless. But there's more good news, folks. More good news. More. Because who's coming in second? Well, Mike Huckabee. And I'm telling you, anytime there's an economic crisis, the first word, I don't know about you, but first name that comes to my mind is Mike Huckabee because of his knowledge of financial markets, of the Federal Reserve. Let's just move on. Coming in third, Mr. Plastic Man, Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney coming in at 15%. Now, here's a guy who obviously wants to be president, not for any particular reason I can see, wants to be president to just more or less keep on doing the same thing that's been done over and over again, and apparently the Republicans will vote for him, in spite of his health care program in Massachusetts, in spite of the fact that he's changed his views 118 times, and he'll change them 118 more times if that's what it takes to get in. We've heard word that he is prepared to spend $500 million to become president. So, if Trump does run as an independent, as he's threatened to do, well, he'll have a bit of a run for his money, so to speak. 855-4-SCHIFF, that's 855-472-4433. Am I off base about all this? Am I too worried about this? Is this just flash in the pan? We're never going to hear from Trump again? I mean, I suppose, imagine the skeletons in this guy's closet, after all, right? So there's Mitt Romney coming in third. And then Newt Gingrich. Just when you think we're rid of this guy, Newt Gingrich at 11%. All right, so Newt Gingrich, we're told by the media, he's a big right-winger. Right-wing Newt Gingrich. He's an extremist out there, that Newt Gingrich. All right, well, you look at him closely, though, and he really doesn't have a right-wing record, if we want to define that term the way any normal person does. So Gingrich is very much a fan of Franklin Roosevelt. He says Franklin Roosevelt lifted the country out of the Great Depression. That's more or less the opposite of what a right-winger would believe. He stands with John Kerry on climate change. Remember so-called debate the two of them had, where they both showed up together, and Kerry gives his opening, or Newt Gingrich gives his opening remarks, and he's so conciliatory that John Kerry says, you know what, I got to discard my opening remarks because I want to welcome Newt Gingrich and thank him for being, in effect, such a pushover. Well, that's not a YouTube, I'm sure old Newt wants getting out around there. He supported the Medicare prescription drug benefit, so thank you. More trillions in unfunded liabilities. Federal programs to pay for more teachers. That's constitutional. Internet access for every American. Federal government should be looking into that, looking into giving a free laptop to every American child, paying rewards to students who choose to take challenging math and science courses. I don't know in 21st century America what even qualifies as a challenging math and science course, but you'll get some dough from Newt Gingrich if he has his way, and one can go on and on. And there he is in fourth place. Now, I've sometimes thought somebody needs to do a YouTube. It can't be me, because I have zero multimedia capability. I mean, you take all the multimedia capability in the world, you roll it up into a ball, get rid of it, that's what I've got. What we need is somebody to make a YouTube going through some of those policies I just mentioned and saying, hey, everybody, which one of these Obama policies do you support? And then at the end, it's revealed that these are Gingrich policies. I wonder if that would finally slay the Gingrich dragon. I just don't know. And then naturally, we all expected this. Sarah Palin coming in fifth at 8%, Ron Paul at sixth with 5%. But the Palin thing is what I sort of expected. Now, I'm going to get some disagreement on this, but from my vantage point, Sarah Palin is an airhead, and I just don't see any other way of putting it. I mean, I appreciate her alleged maverick character, although, they call John McCain a maverick. When you're a maverick, it means, you normally you do the typical bipartisan stupid things, and once in a while you ditch your party and you do a stupid thing with the other party, and they call that being a maverick. So you'll pardon my skepticism of the race of mavericks in the world. So Sarah Palin, now, the reason I say that, I'm not some elitist snob, but you feel like an elitist snob when you look at this group of candidates. I mean, for heaven's sake here. I mean, we're not asking for Albert Einstein. But Palin, for just one example, they were asking her just an innocent question. Look, we know you don't like Roe versus Wade. You have any other Supreme Court decisions that you don't like? I mean, is there just anything in the couple of 100 years in its existence, anything at all that you disapprove of? And she couldn't think of one. Could not think of one. And you say, oh, that's not fair. The average person couldn't answer that question. Well, the average person is not running for president. That is a problem. Now, other thing, she was asked, so which of the founding fathers do you admire? She gave the very typical politician response, all of them. All of them. Even though they hated each other, they were constantly undercutting each other, they had completely opposed political principles. And this, my friend Kevin Gutzman mentions all this recently in an interview with Mike Church. I mean, let's remember, it was Aaron Burr who shot Alexander Hamilton dead. I don't know what to do about all this. All right, listen, folks, going to a break. Let's hear from you. 855-4SHIP. That's 855-472-4433. More bashing of our wise overlords when we come back in just a moment. Stay right there. Welcome back, everybody. It's Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods in for Peter. All right, let's go to the phones. We've got Paul in Ventura, California. Paul in Ventura. You're on the Peter Schiff Show. Good morning.
Sir, I just wanted to thank you. Much respect, of course. My question is about a video that was on Russia Today on the 14th, titled Michael Scheuer, Scheuer, quote, U.S. depended on tyrannies, unquote. And Michael Scheuer is a professor at Georgetown Center for Peace and Security Studies. He former intelligence officer at the CIA. In his 22-year career, he served as chief of the bin Laden issue station from 96 to 99. And he also was worked again as special advisor to the chief of the bin Laden unit from September of 2001 to November of 2004.
Yeah, he knows what he's talking about.
Basically, he says that Bahrain is a key point because we could eventually go to war with Iran if protesters keep demonstrating in Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia will eventually just basically continue to slaughter them like cattle. And then the question is whether or not Iran will step in.
Right.
And if Iran steps in, then the United States will go to war with Iran, possibly initiating the U.S. draft. So my question for you is that possible with our current monetary situation?
All right, well, these are all good questions. First of all, I'm very much an admirer of Michael Scheuer. He was present there with Ron Paul several years ago at his famous press conference where he gave Rudy Giuliani a list of recommended reading, and Scheuer supported everything he was saying. And he is saying that the Bahrain situation is very similar to Serbia just before World War I, where there's some small country and nobody really, there's some situation that nobody wants to lead to a world war. And yet somehow a world war comes. And he says that this could be quite similar for the reasons that you mentioned. And it's difficult not only for the financial position of the U.S., but also where are the troops? We're out of troops. And so you would indeed need to engage in the military draft. And then we would find out what happened to all the anti-war people on the left, who disappeared when Obama got elected. Well, you start drafting them into the military, those protests will come back. But that's basically the answer. Now, in terms of could we do it, we'd have to borrow more and print more. Well, it would accelerate the eventual collapse. I mean, I'm surprised the thing has lasted as long as it has. It would accelerate the collapse, certainly. But, as long as you have enough suckers out there willing to keep lending to us, then it can keep crawling along. But if we want to keep shooting ourselves in the foot with crazy policies like this, we're only hastening the decline. Okay, let's go to James in Melbourne, Florida. James, you are on the Peter Schiff Show.
Hi, Tom. I'm a huge fan. Thank you very much for taking my call.
My pleasure.
I love the spat with Mark Levin, and I'd like to tell other fans to please, when Tom intellectually demolishes someone like that, go post it on neocon sites like their neocon Facebook pages and stuff. I know you can't post to Levin's because he'll immediately eliminate you, but there are other pages that neocons frequent, and they need to see Tom's good ideas. Anyway, I was going to mention that Newt Gingrich is also a fan of ethanol welfare to the corn farmers, which drives me nuts because, well, just of various reasons. But for one thing, it's not even green. Even Al Gore is more honest than that. And have you noticed that the same people who would not take Ron Paul seriously last time now want me to take Palin, Trump, Bachmann, and Gingrich seriously now? I mean, it ain't going to happen, folks.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I forgot about the ethanol thing, but I mean, talk about a scam, the whole ethanol program. Like people, there's actually a gas station near me that charges more for the gas that doesn't have the ethanol in it, even though it's a lower grade of gas, because people just don't want the ethanol in there. But you're right. I mean, we look at these people, I mean, we all know, I mean, how long do you have to be around observing the American political scene to know that you vote for one of these people, absolutely nothing changes? But I'll tell you, the one thing that will be exactly the same will be at the end of the 4 years, we'll have all the alleged conservatives scratching their heads saying, gee, so-and-so turned out to be not so conservative after all. Well, you know what? At what point are you going to stop being played for a sucker? At what point do you start to insist that I don't care about electability and all this stuff. I am going to support somebody who is going to tell the truth. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, Newt can get elected, so I'll vote for him. Well, first of all, that's more of a threat than a promise, as far as I'm concerned, getting Newt elected. But even if you do get him elected, the crash is coming. The fiscal collapse is coming. So, gee, you can pat yourself on the back that I voted for the guy who brought it in. Or you can say, well, you know what, I'm going to work to change public opinion so that somebody with half a brain might actually be able to get in. Okay, we're got a little bit of time left in this segment. Let me go to Luke in San Diego, California. Luke, you are on the air on the Peter Schiff Show.
Hey, Tom. Hey, big fan. I read Meltdown by you. So
good man.
I'm a veteran out here. I just got out of the Navy 09, and I'm just kind of new to the whole Austrian economics thing. You know, I didn't know before I got out. Too busy, but so I'm talking about like corporate welfare, you know, for like the military-industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I would order stuff, like a circuit card would be like $5,000. Are these just like proprietary contracts? Like these guys mark everything up because they know they have to go get it from these big, you know, military defense contractors? And also, this is my second question. I keep reading that gas prices are caused by inflation and not because of inflation. So,
okay, all right. Well, let's do them in reverse because I mean I know some about the military-industrial complex, and they have historical costing and cost-plus contracts, and so I mean it does tend to encourage the kind of practices you're talking about. But in terms of inflation causing gas prices to go up, or the gas prices causing inflation, is that what your argument is, or is that what people are telling you? The gas prices cause the inflation?
And you know, they're like, oh, it's causing it.
Yeah, no. Basically, the quick answer to that is if gas prices start to go up, let's say the Fed is not increasing the money supply, the gas prices just go up. Well, that means you and I, when we buy our gas, we have less money to buy other things. So on average, prices don't do anything. Okay, so gas prices go up means you and I can't buy as many ears of corn or something, so that pushes ears of corn down. How do all prices rise simultaneously? The only way that can be is by the Fed inflation. So no, it is not that the gas prices are driving it. That cost-push version of inflation just is not true. It's a fallacy. We're going to talk more about inflation, though, with my guest coming up after the break, a genius, one of these geniuses you have not heard of but will not be able to live without. When we come back on the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods in for Peter. Well, my first guest today is a guy I have never had a chance to speak to or meet in person, but whose analysis I rely on very much. In fact, every single time our overlords do some particularly asinine thing, I always think to myself, what is my next guest's take on it? My guest is Robert Wenzel. Bob Wenzel is editor and publisher of economicpolicyjournal.com. economicpolicyjournal.com. It is updated constantly. I don't know how the guy has the energy or the knowledge to be doing this all the time, but he's got excellent analysis, good Austrian insights into financial markets, the economy, what's going on in the news, all over the world, and gold, and just, you name it. Bob Wenzel is on top of it, and he's funny, too. He's funny and devastating, and if this is not in your RSS feed or you're not visiting economicpolicyjournal.com, you're missing out on a lot. And once you start doing it after today's program, I hope, you're going to wonder how you got by without it. Bob, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us today.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for the great introduction.
Well, my pleasure. I want to start off by talking about something that, for some people is not all that interesting, but for our audience is very interesting. I want to just say a little something about inflation, price inflation, because it's been a matter of such controversy. We've got, we've all seen, producer prices going up, and we've seen what's going on with food, of course, with energy. And Paul Krugman and people who agree with him are arguing this is just a temporary fluke, this is a demand surge, this is emerging markets or whatever. But, emerging markets have been emerging for kind of a long time. It wasn't like they just emerged 15 minutes ago. And it wasn't like we had a global fasting ritual going on up till recently, and now suddenly everybody's eating and putting a demand on the food supply. So what do you make of all this? What do you make of Krugman's take, and what do you think is really going on with inflation?
Sure. I think what you have, and what Krugman, Federal Reserve economists, and those guys too, is they tend to look at something called core inflation. Now, what you have to understand about core inflation is that it was created at the behest of President Richard Nixon. Okay, that should tell you enough right there. When inflation was going up in the 70s, He was very concerned about the inflation, and he went to Arthur Burns, and he went to the people at the BLS that actually put the indexes together, and came up with this index that took food and energy out of the CPI. So basically, now when economists like Krugman and the Federal Reserve look at inflation, they say, oh, there's no inflation, because what you need to look at is the core inflation. And the core number is something that was invented for all practical purposes by Richard Nixon. I mean, it's absolutely amazing that anyone would look at that. The second thing is that what Krugman tends to do, and this is where Austrians differ, because we know that prices start by people who are bidding for goods versus kind of a cost push. And in ways, wholesale prices help push prices up, but I think it's only as a signal to retail stores that there's greater demands for their product. But what happens is Krugman is looking at wages, and he's saying, hey, wages aren't going up, so you can't have inflation. But what I say is, well, look at what the Federal Reserve is doing. They're printing money like crazy. It may not be going into but it's going somewhere. And sure enough, if you look, it's the stock market is going up, the Wall Street bonuses are going up. All these things that are not counted in or don't impact wages. That stuff is going up, so the money is getting into the system, and it is causing the inflation. And I really expect it to really hit dramatic levels in the second part of this year. There's just been so much money entering the system that there's no way you can't have pretty close to double-digit price inflation hitting us.
And the fact that it's not showing up in wages might just be more evidence that the redistribution of wealth that occurs through Fed inflation is, in fact, a redistribution of wealth, and the wage earners tend not to participate in it to the extent that some Wall Street guy does. Now, let me ask you. I mean, don't you think, Bob? What if I played devil's advocate and I said, not regarding inflation, but just the overall situation? I mean, look, haven't they fixed things? Weren't we on the precipice of a disaster a few years ago, and now? I mean, it's not perfect, but, we're hobbling along all right, and, things are likely to get better, and at least it didn't bottom out and the whole system didn't collapse. So, aren't you grateful then for the Federal Reserve and for the Treasury and all the wise economists they employed? I mean, they saved us. Didn't they save us, Bob?
Well, what they did is they saved Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and all those people who have their entire structures of their business based on the Federal Reserve printing money. And so what Ben Bernanke did is he went in and he saved Wall Street. So sure, Wall Street is doing great right now, but that's not certainly helping the guy who's still unemployed, the person whose wages are not rising when they have to go out and buy these things that Nixon doesn't count as part of the inflation. And so your headline stuff, the things that mainstream media will look at and point to, and the Federal Reserve, specifically the stock market, is going up, but that's it. The rest of the country is in terrible shape.
Now, you've said in the past that if the Fed does manage to engage in significant inflation, that this could lead to as it always would, some kind of artificial boost to employment, which just calls to mind Hayek's point that the stimulus that money printing provides is in the errors that it causes. It'll just misdirect a lot more resources. So if we can't necessarily trust those figures because it could just be a manipulated recovery, what can we look at? I mean, what kind of indicators do you look at to say, we've got a healthy economy, things are improving, or that right now, what kind of indicators are telling you that really all the news items about how things are improving are a lot of bunk?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I mean, the key to the manipulation of the economy is you have to look at the money supply and how much the Federal Reserve is increasing the money supply. If they're increasing the money supply, that's telling the average person that there's money going somewhere into the economy, somewhere into the system that's not going into their pocket. So that's an advantage to those people. And of course, the Federal Reserve would like to think they can just sort of print this money forever. But the problem is that the more and more they print, the more inflationary it gets, and sooner or later the Fed has to decide whether they're going to battle the price inflation or whether they're going to pull back a little bit and sort of crash their false structure of the economy. And that's what the whole business cycle is about, this printing of money, which eventually kicks into inflation. And then what happens is the Fed pulls back because of that price inflation, and it crashes the economy. Now, one further point that I'd like to make is right now there's a lot of talk about whether the Fed is going to do something called quantitative easing 3. They're in quantitative easing 2 now, which I think is entirely a situation that reflects upon Ben Bernanke as a mad scientist. In the old days, and I don't want to get too technical here, but there are ways that the Alan Greenspan, Paul Volcker, and Fed chairman before that controlled the money supply. Since Bernanke has come in, he has invented what he calls new tools to control the money supply, which just makes everything more complex, and I seriously doubt he knows how to control all of them under all conditions. And with quantitative easing 2, there's been talk of all these hundreds of billions of dollars that the Fed is pumping into the system. And I promise, Tom, this is as technical as I'll get with federal market operations. What's happening is the money...
Hang on just a sec. Bob, let me interrupt you because I don't want you to try to start that just before we have to go. So we're going to do a quick break. We'll come back more with Bob Wenzel. I'm going to let him take on Timothy Geithner, man-to-man, at least via recording, which is what he's longed to do, no doubt. When we come back, we'll finish that point. And we'll be taking some calls, 855-4-SHIFT. That's 855-472-4433. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods, in for Peter. On the line with me is Robert Wenzel, editor and publisher of economicpolicyjournal.com. We're taking your calls, 855-4-SHIFT. That's 855-472-4433. Bob, it is an atrocity that I had to interrupt you when you were talking about quantitative easing. So if it's not too much burden, let's go back to that so you can finish that point.
Sure. I was beginning to think for a minute that you were working for Bernanke or something and shut me off. But anyways, people are focused on quantitative easing 2 and the big question whether there's going to be a quantitative easing 3. And my analysis of the situation is that quantitative easing 2 was a huge multi-hundred billion dollar operation. Most of that money did not go into the money supply, did not go into the system. It's gone into something called excess reserves. And it's too technical to get into exactly what they are. But people should understand there's over $1 trillion in excess reserves right now. That's money that is not in the system. So when you hear talk that the Federal Reserve may not institute a quantitative easing 3 after QE2 is finished, that does not mean that the Federal Reserve may not add additional money to the system, into the economy. They've got over $1 trillion sitting on the side that they can push into the money system at any time. So there's tremendous danger of huge inflation. And that's one of the tools that Bernanke has created, and I'm not sure he can really control that under all circumstances. So there might be an inflation that gets way out of hand beyond anything we've seen with any other Fed chairman.
Well, I'm glad that you, I think it was your blog where I saw you quoting Krugman saying that, inflation's no big deal, don't worry about it. And I think you said, all right, look, April 17th, 2011, you save this date. This is the date, as late as this, that Krugman was saying, don't worry about any of this. Let me shift gears for a minute. I want to talk a little bit about the debt ceiling, because we had a lot of scare tactics used on us with regard to the so-called government shutdown, which was more of a promise than a threat for me. I mean, that's fine. Right. But we're getting the same kind of scare tactics with regard to the debt ceiling. And I want to play a Timothy Geithner clip, who is really, he and Bernanke are probably the two stars of economicpolicyjournal.com after yourself. And I want you to hear what he has to say about what would happen if the debt ceiling weren't lifted. Can we play clip number 3, please?
What if it wasn't raised? What is the doomsday scenario?
I'll be very direct about it. And people understand this. Again, anybody running a business or understands this. What will happen is that we'd have to stop making payments to our seniors, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We have to stop paying veterans benefits. We have to stop paying all the other payments, all the other things the government does. And then we would risk default on our interest payments. If we did that, we tip the U.S. economy and the world economy back into recession, depression. I think it would make the last crisis look like a tame, modest crisis. It would be much more dramatic. The cost of borrowing would go up for everybody, and it would have a permanent, devastating damage on our creditworthiness as a country. And that's why there is no responsible person that would take any risk that we allow the world to start to fear that the U.S. would court that tragedy. Again, if you take it too close to the edge, then people will start to wonder, really, what are we doing? What are they thinking?
Okay, Bob, now, I think this kind of speaks for itself, but of course, the scenario he's describing in which we won't be able to pay our seniors and our veterans benefits, well, that sounds like the scenario that's coming if we stay on this path. But right. What do you make of this? What do you make of this kind of scare remark like we just heard from the Treasury Secretary?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the guy that was master of that was Hank Paulson. When he went to Congress and said, I need $800 billion or the world's going to collapse and all that. So Geithner is trying to imitate Paulson as far as that, except he doesn't have the stature and the strong personality that Paulson had to pull that off. But again, just because you don't raise the debt ceiling doesn't mean you can't make any payments. You have money coming in. The government has money, especially now, right around tax time, with plenty of money coming in, and you don't have to cut money off from seniors. I mean, if you just want to sort of look at it that way, there's plenty of things in Washington that you could cut before even getting close to cutting the money for seniors, and including the fact that we're running wars all over the place, and now assisting in Libya, and that's costing hundreds of millions. In your book Rollback, you mentioned many ways that the defense budget could be cut back. So basically, I mean, there's a lot that can be done. Refusing to raise the debt ceiling does nothing but just stop a lot of nonsense, and it would just require cuts. I mean, it's that simple. If people can't borrow or they don't have money coming in, they cut back. I mean, it's that simple. It's all the United States government would have to do.
Bob, I got a bunch of people on the line. You mind taking a call?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, let's hear from Tim in Chicago. Tim in Chicago, you are on the Peter Schiff Show.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing? My question is on the premise that the Fed is printing money. Since they're so secretive, how do we know that they don't have the money to buy the bonds?
Yeah, well, see, that gets a little bit into the technicals of how the Federal Reserve works. I mean, they can literally print the money. I mean, technically, they do it electronically now. They just credit different banks with money, and it's all just kept mostly on computers. But when it all comes down to it, they can issue any amount in the world, billions, trillions. The Federal Reserve does not have money that they've got involved that they decide to take out and suddenly start buying Treasury securities with. What they're really doing is creating it out of the air.
Sean in Corpus Christi, we're getting low on time, so if you can state your question quickly. Sean in Corpus Christi, you're on the air on the Peter Schiff Show.
Yeah, what trustworthy telltale sign or combination of events could we expect to see right before the final collapse of the U.S. dollar and hyperinflation kicks in?
Now, that's the $25,000 well, that used to be 20, now it's more like a $25 trillion question. Bob, what do you say?
Yeah, I would say you're seeing the signs right now in where you never know what the exact news item is that's going to sort of tip everything. But basically, you have a situation now that could collapse in so many different ways that you just have to be on alert now and prepare, because when it comes, it's going to come very, very quickly, and things will change overnight. I mean, if you really think about the financial crisis that occurred, I mean, it came pretty quickly, and it's going to be the same thing with regard to hyperinflation or however the scenario plays out.
Now, you've been publishing economicpolicyjournal.com since 2007. What were you doing before that? Because it seemed like you came onto the scene just out of the clear blue, like a shot from heaven, and now you know I can't start my day without reading your site.
Yeah, well, that's great to do. I mean, I was pretty much in money management hedge fund business, working for some top people, providing some insights for them with regard to specific investments and things along that nature. And basically, I just saw the situation developing in the United States, and I just felt people needed to just understand what's going on, and that's really why I started the blog to get that word out and provide an analysis that you don't get from mainstream economists or analysts on Wall Street. So the problem is just so great, and I did fine in my days in working with the different money managers, hedge fund managers, and this sort of is the fruit from that period.
We've got about 30 seconds left. You see a growth in maybe not. Just growth in respect for and interest in Austrian economics and our point of view, that you're able to say things now and be taken seriously in a way that wouldn't have happened, let's say, 10 years ago?
Oh, sure. Well, without question. I mean, I can see in talking even to Wall Street analysts and things like that, when I was talking to them 10, 15 years ago, and there was no interest at all. And not only is there interest now, but it's really a case where they will ask questions and respect the people that are involved in that. And it has a lot to. The two things that caused it. One, Ron Paul has done, I think, a tremendous amount to get exposure for Austrian economics. And the second thing is just what's going on in the economy. I mean, it's the Austrian economists that have
credibility
about the crisis. Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, it's been a pleasure to have you. I urge everybody, got to check out economicpolicyjournal.com. Thanks so much for spending some time with us this morning, Bob. We're coming right back with another great guest to talk about some more what our overlords have been up to right here on the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. Don't go anywhere. We got a lot more bashing to do. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods in for Peter. And our next guest is the great C.J. Maloney. I got to know C.J. Maloney from his article archive at Mises.org, MISES.org, where he's written about so many different subjects I can hardly believe it's only one person. He's a blogger for the History News Network and the Daily Kos, and I want to talk to him today in particular about his new book published just this year by Wiley, who's a big publisher. It's called Back to the Land, Arthur Dale, FDR's New Deal, and the Costs of Economic Planning. So I believe another bit of orthodoxy is about to be smashed, another icon thrown to the ground. CJ, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
All right, thank you very much, sir. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We're not going to talk about baseball today. He and I,
As a Mets fan, I don't want to.
Yeah, there you go. We have a bit of a rivalry here. First of all, what I'd like you to do is, you are the world's foremost expert on Arthur Dale, West Virginia. I think it's safe to say in this particular episode. So first of all, just before we get into the meat of how crazy this whole thing was, can you just explain, just nuts and bolts, what exactly did the New Deal planners try to do in Arthur Dale? And then we can talk about what the actual effects were.
Well, this was, when you say the New Deal planners, Arthur Dale itself was a creation of what was called the Division of Subsistence Homesteads. It was quite literally a personal pet project of FDR and a circle of like-minded friends he had gathered around him. The entire point behind it was to take people out of the cities, which they thought was an inferior way to live compared to rural living. And as Eleanor Roosevelt called the town, it was a human experiment station. There was a thin veneer of charity in it, in which they resettled impoverished people into the town, but the town itself was designed to create a new American, to populate a new America, where they would turn away from the rugged individualism as embodied in the American Republic and create a new collectivist-minded man. That was the entire point of Arthur Dale.
Well, tell us a little something about just the nuts and bolts of if you were living in Arthur Dale, or what would entice you to go there in the first place, And then secondly, once you got there, once you were resettled, to use a nice bureaucratic term, what was your life like?
Well, in terms, they believe that in order to keep people from moving back to the city, the rural towns had to be just as enticing materialistically as the city. So when you moved away from, these people were repopulated from an area called Scott's Run. It was a really incredibly impoverished coal mining region of northern West Virginia. And when they arrived in Arthurdale, they found the town ready built. The homes were built for them. Well, they helped build the homes. And they had what at the times were unfathomable luxuries in the rural area of early 1930s America. Each house had running water. It had electricity. The town itself, the school complex itself had gymnasiums with showers. And when they moved in, they found that everything was ready provided, from bed linens all the way up to the furniture.
So, well, what's the problem? Isn't this great? I mean, people get to have a picturesque lifestyle, and everything's provided for them. What could go wrong?
Well, the entire purpose behind the town was also to prove the idea behind subsistence farming. What it was they were going to farm the area, because each homestead had about an average of 5 acres put around the house where they would farm just for their food. And at the same time, through a decentralization policy of the American industrial base, each colony, there were about 200 of these colonies built across America during the New Deal. Each colony would be given a factory as needed, according to the central plan, to provide them with cash wages as well. Colonies such as these had sprung up across America from even before the Republic. I mean, Benjamin Franklin himself had written a land resettlement policy for the British when Pennsylvania was still a British colony. The fatal flaw with all these colonies was the fact that the insistence that everything had to be done collectively. You had to have communal farming. All the produce was divided, was put into one pot and divided communally. So without the base of private property, everything fell to infighting. People were fighting over how much everyone should get, and that it was a misunderstanding of human nature, basically, a wish for private property that destroyed all the former colonies and eventually destroyed Arthurdale as well. That was the flaw in this.
Now, did everybody more or less disperse? I mean, how long did this thing more or less go before people essentially acknowledged it was a bust?
Well, the colony itself was created in 1933 is when work started, and after numerous delays, people finally moved in. I believe it was June of 1934. The federal authorities finally withdrew in 1947, is when the project was terminated. And the loss to the taxpayer was total. About $2.5 million, give or take, was flushed down the federal rabbit hole just for this project alone. Across the entire resettlement administration, which was what the Division of Subsistence Homesteads fell under, basically the loss to the taxpayer was almost 100% across the board on all the colonies. Some of the colonies still exist. Arthurdale itself still exists. Beautiful little town now, and it's really a bedroom community for the nearby town of Morgantown, which is home to West Virginia University. And every year they have a New Deal festival. It's more in honor of Eleanor Roosevelt than anything else. She was the angel of Arthurdale.
Did anybody think there was any kind of contradiction between the fact that federal agriculture policy at that time was aimed at coping with what was perceived as overproduction and excessive encouragement to production, and therefore prices that were too low, and now you're going to encourage people to leave the cities and go engage in more farming?
Well, that was one of the sticking points where the colonists came into conflict with the New Deal grandees who created this town. They were, it was sort of a contradiction. They were encouraged to be successful, but not too successful. Under the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the entire policy of the New Deal was to restrict production and raise prices. which boggles your mind when you think how the FDR administration came to have the reputation as a friend to the little guy when they were trying to raise food prices in the middle of a crushing depression. But be that as it may, one of the first things that let the colonists know that they weren't living in Kansas anymore, so to speak, is when they went to sell their excess produce to the local stores, the federal authorities clamped down on them and said, absolutely not, that belongs to the Department of Agriculture. You are not allowed to sell any excess food which might come into competition with the local farmers. And that was a reflection of the entire New Deal philosophy to restrict production and keep prices artificially elevated.
Well, there you have it. There is the New Deal in a nutshell, whether it's industrial policy or agriculture policy. Let's try and produce less, jack prices up, and bring about recovery that way. Well, and now we see how it impinges on this small town and settlement. Well, when we come back, we're going to continue along this line. We're going to look at why this matters for us today. We can find so many roots of so much hideous, awful social policy and economic policy in this one settlement of Arthurdale. Coming back with C.J. Maloney on the Peter Schiff Show, 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-472-4433. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods, in for Peter. Joined for a few more minutes with C.J. Maloney, talking about his book, Back to the Land. So, C.J., why, when we look at this example of resettlement and central planning and encouraging collectivist ideology, because we see that in the education. We got federal involvement in education there. We got the closest thing to socialized health care the country had seen in this little town. What are the, in some ways you could say this is a microcosm, even though this seems so foreign to us. And none of us lives in a environment like this, but yet in some ways it's microcosm. It is of modern America. Or am I off on that, or can we draw some conclusions about what America later became? Do we see some sort of things, some sort of modern social democracy in germ in Arthurdale?
Well, that more than anything is what really made me obsessed, for lack of a better word, with the story of Arthurdale, because the history of the town and its creation in its own right is a fascinating story, but the more I researched the birth of the town itself, the more it said to me that this was really the birth of modern America, meaning a democratic America, by pure democracy. What the few remnants of the American Republic were put to rest at Arthurdale. Arthurdale is where the New Deal rubber hit the road. It showed it was a vision of what FDR and his allies wished America to be. This is what they wanted to do for the common man. And a lot of what you see in modern America today, as you pointed to, was first tried at Arthurdale. You had one, it was the first big federal housing project during peacetime. It was the so-called Obamacare today, the first socialized medicine supported with federal tax money, was the clinic at Arthurdale. And they specifically started the clinic there with that in mind. And in education, by far, it was the first federal inroad into the education of children, even so much as stating what the curriculum is. But that's our day-to-day. More than anything, the tragedy at Arthurdale, to my view, was in two things. First off, in the destruction of the rule of law. There was absolutely no way, by the most wide-ranging interpretation of the Constitution, where the federal authorities anywhere within that document are giving any power to experiment with people to create a better human being. There's no reading of the Constitution which gives them that. And Congress itself never voted on this. The rider which created the division of subsistence homesteads was tacked on to the immense National Industrial Recovery Act, which nobody read either. And the entire project was funded and continued for its entire life merely by presidential edicts, by executive orders issued by FDR. But more than anything, to my mind, what we see today, how it shaped America, is the fact that the federal authorities not only have the power, but the moral right to experiment with people, to make us better in whatever sense they believe is to be better. And you see that in everyday laws. Just we're too obese, they have to stop us from smoking, they have to stop us from having too much sex. Whatever the current social experiment fad is, the first step in that, in the mindset that the federal authorities can make us better, happened at Arthurdale.
Well, it is a fascinating and very important and utterly forgotten story, and we are very much in your debt for digging down there into the Orwellian memory hole and telling it to us. So I urge everybody, check out this book, Back to the Land, by C.J. Maloney. You can Google him and find him on blogs all over the Internet. Very, very smart guy, and you can read just all different types of things, everything from the Panic of 1819 to Arthurdale. C.J. Maloney, thanks so much for taking some time with us today.
Thank you for giving me your time. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Let's go back to the phones for a brief moment here before our next break. Let's go to Taylor in Marietta, Georgia. Taylor, you are on the Peter Schiff Show.
Hey, Dr. Woods.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's great to talk to you. I was really just I was wondering, when are we going to hear about the Tom Woods Show? This live radio thing, I really like it.
If there were a Tom Woods Show, I don't think I'd be allowed to advertise it on the Peter Schiff Show, but thank you very much.
I was wondering if you think that the recent Fed disclosures about all them giving money to the foreign banks, do you think that's going to be a big issue in the coming election? And do you think it's going to really separate, like the Trump supporters from the Ron Paul supporters?
It's a good question. I mean, it was interesting. I don't know if you saw the news item in which Mitt Romney expressly said, I have no intention of making the Fed an issue. He says Bernanke is just doing the best according to his lights, best he can, so I'm not really going to make that an issue. So, okay, so I'll take the elephant in the living room off the table. It's typical, and in fact, 5 years ago we wouldn't have thought anything of it when a politician says I'm going to take the Fed off the table. But now that it's been on the table for several years, it's interesting how he's still running away from it. Now, with Trump, well, you could still see him having some sort of marginal criticisms, but it's hard for me to imagine a guy like Trump, not being ultimately a supporter of the Fed. I mean, really. I think we would have heard about this a lot earlier. So I think this will distinguish them. Now, one thing I said, I had a chance to interview Ron and Rand Paul at CPAC in one of these large ballrooms, and we had a big, huge crowd there, and I said, let's say you were to run for president in 2012, talking to Ron. I said, you're going to have a lot of candidates sounding like you. They're going to try to sound like you because they know it plays well. And they're going to try to deceive people, frankly, into supporting it. Like, everyone's going to sound like he's against the Fed. I mean, you can leave Romney out. But, Newt Gingrich has been critical of the Fed. Sarah Palin has been critical of the Fed. I mean, at least their speechwriters have been. So how do you distinguish yourself in that type of atmosphere? And he said, well, I just remember the other debates and when I would ask people, why did you feel I stood out? And they said, well, because you sounded like you're the only one who was telling the truth. So, I mean, I think beneath the surface, even if there is some superficial similarity, beneath the surface, it'll be clear who the genuine person is and who the celebrity or the stuffed shirt or the plastic man. I think it's pretty obvious. But it's true, but they are going to sound like him. They're going to try to sound like Ron Paul, like Mike Huckabee is all upset at the TSA and the groping, and that wouldn't have happened under George W. Bush, that's for sure. But that's a Ron Paul theme. A lot of them are and Trump is talking about not being the policeman of the world, but he's like a Ross Perot. I mean, he knows kind of what he's against, but his political positions are so impossible to follow and unformed. I mean, if you could give money to Hillary Clinton, then turn around and say John McCain will be a great president, then turn around and say you don't want to be the policeman of the world, who in the world are you after a while? So I am hopeful that we'll have some more fun and some more fireworks, because I'll tell you, in that 2008 presidential campaign, I just had a heck of a time. And I spent so much time watching Ron Paul YouTubes every day that once the campaign ended, I hardly knew what to do with myself. Suddenly I have to be productive again. Well, all right, listen, thanks for the call, Taylor. We've got a few people on the line. Try and get to you guys after the break, which is coming up right this minute. You are listening to The Peter Schiff Show. All right, everybody, welcome back to The Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods, in for Peter. I'm going to go back to the phones now. Thank you guys for your patience, by the way. I'm sorry you have to stay on for so long. But let's see. Let's go to Darren in California. Darren, you are on The Peter Schiff Show. Hello.
Hey, Tom. Great to talk to you. I think the last caller's right. You need your own show.
Thank you.
Anyway, Trump, he's just a stuffed shirt with a bad comb over is all he is. I mean, if it weren't for the Federal Reserve, he could not be where he is. I mean, to go BK and then leverage back up. I mean, without the Federal Reserve, he's nothing. So he's not going to say anything about the Federal Reserve.
No, that's true. On the other hand, I thought to myself, he's got experience with bankruptcy, so maybe that would be a qualification to be president of the United States. Maybe that's what we need, is somebody who knows how to get through a bankruptcy proceeding, because we're heading there.
Also, too, I've read a lot of your stuff on nullification. Do you ever talk about a nullification with regard to jury nullification? Do you ever get into that?
I've talked about, just because I'm not much of an expert on it, I'm completely in support of it. And one of my books, my 33 Questions About American History You're Not Supposed to Ask, has a chapter showing that the Founding Fathers believed in jury nullification, that's what they took that absolutely for granted when they talked about the right to a jury trial. Just the definition of that term at that time meant not only that a jury would have the power to judge the facts of the case, but also the law that was involved in the case. Then they thought that ultimately, you can talk all day long about wise legislators making law on behalf of the common good, but in practice we all know it's, smoke-filled rooms and special interest groups, so that the way for the people really to have a say in the laws that govern them is to have the power to nullify the enforcement of those laws. So, I mean, that needs to be encouraged as much as possible. There's a website called the Fully Informed Jury Association, FIJA.org, that has a lot more information about it.
I've actually had personal conversations with Red Beckman before. I tracked him down and had a phone conversation with him. Interesting guy. Anyway, I wanted to talk about your last guest and FDR, and I always get confused about this because do you know who Webster Tarpley is? Well, you know who Lyndon LaRouche is and Webster Tarpley, right?
I know who both of them are, yes.
Okay, so I always hear Webster Tarpley talking about, they actually kind of support what FDR did and his New Deal programs and Congress creating the money, and which I understand because they could allocate it and not charge interest on it versus what the Federal Reserve does. So what's your take on those guys? Because I always hear Webster Tarpley calling Austrians reactionary, and I don't understand. I listen to a lot of the stuff he says, but then I kind of get confused about that whole thing. What's your take on it?
Well, I have a lot of people telling me I should listen to Webster Tarpley, and I think he says some things that are valuable and that we can appreciate. I wish he were more generous toward people who disagree with him. I mean, I'm not going to bash him the way he bashes Austrians. I don't see that that's productive, especially when I don't think he's really listening to them fairly. I mean, this is a guy who says that we've got a free market, we've got extreme laissez-faire in this country. I mean, really, I would expect Hillary Clinton to say that. That's just a completely mistaken analysis. And the thing is that if I cornered Tarpley and pointed out all the ways in which the state apparatus enriches the elite few, he would admit this. Okay, well, all right, then don't call it laissez-faire in the first place. It just confuses matters. When it comes to FDR, at the time there were people who thought he wasn't leftist enough. Huey Long and Francis Townsend had their own various schemes. They had the Share Our Wealth program, Huey Long did. But when we look at FDR, I just can't imagine what there is to support here. And it could be relevant that I read a Tarpley article in which he said that surely government health care must be included in what is meant in the General Welfare Clause to the Constitution. The general welfare must mean that the federal government can provide health care to it. Now, bear in mind, this is the very institution that Tarpley believes, is full of sociopaths who are just lining their own pockets, but he wants to entrust his health to these people. I don't understand. It's like there's some kind of a mismatch here going on. I don't quite get it. But when we talk about all this, the General Welfare Clause of the Constitution meant no such thing. It did not mean anything the federal government thinks might be for the welfare of the people, it can do. I mean, no one would have ratified a constitution like that because every tyrant who ever lived has claimed that the things he's doing redound to the general welfare. That is a completely illegitimate interpretation of the Constitution, but that's the sort of thing that FDR gave us, thanks to his albeit failed court packing scheme. Nevertheless, he got the message through loud and clear, partly through his own speeches and partly through appointing people to the Supreme Court as a result of death or retirement, who completely changed the interpretation of the Constitution, the Commerce Clause, General Welfare Clause, so that it basically did mean the federal government can more or less legislate in any area it wants to. And again, I don't see how, if we really want a free society, that's something we can encourage, be happy about, or the idea that the way to get us out of the Depression was to suspend the antitrust laws, which I'm okay with that part, but suspend them so that FDR can authorize the creation of industrial cartels where each industry can draw up a production code mandating wages, prices, hours of work, and so on, to make sure that no one firm can undersell any other firm. Well, and these tended to be written up by the big companies. This was why the progressives at the time, like John T. Flynn used to be a progressive, and he became a big critic of FDR, said, wait a minute, this is corporatism of the worst kind. This is not progressive. From a progressive point of view, you might criticize FDR for the cartelization scheme, but I certainly can't imagine that you could say he was great. He really was fighting for the people. I just can't imagine that. We had the longest depression ever this country's ever seen in the 1930s. We had many years. We had net private investment negative, so we were using things up, capital equipment up faster than it was being replaced. A double-digit unemployment all throughout. We had the Depression within the Depression, 1937 and 1938. We had farmers being told how much they could produce on their own property. In what way is this an advance toward a free society? I just don't see it. So, for whatever other contributions this gentleman may have made, he is way, way off in urging us to wave incense in front of Franklin Roosevelt. No free people should wave incense before any politician. Okay, we are so close to a break. Do I just yammer on for a while, or do I take a here's what we'll do. I'll take a call, we'll take the question, and then I'll have time to meditate on it over the break. Okay, let's see who we got here. Poor Brian has been waiting a long time. Let's go to Brian in Atlanta. Brian, you are on the Peter Schiff Show.
Yes. Hey, Tom, how are you doing?
Good.
Well, I got the answer to part of my question during the news break that our wise Republican overlords have decided to raise the debt ceiling. But my question is, how long do you think it's going to take our creditors to realize that they're getting screwed and actually demand interest rates that are up, say, 1,000 basis points?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Peter is a bolder guy than I am because he'll make some of these predictions. I'm a historian by training, so the only thing I predict is the past, and so I'm always right. But talking about the future, it seems like, well, particularly now with the terrible catastrophes that have occurred in Japan, well, they're likely to be net liquidators of all this debt, which will put pressure on rates. But, I mean, there's just no way we can envision that by 2020, interest rates are going to stay exactly where they are. And even if they do stay where they are, the government's own numbers say that interest payments on the national debt will hit $1 trillion a year, even in this rosy scenario. It's hard to time it, but I would be shocked if within 5 years we hadn't seen some serious movement. And the thing is, things can accelerate very quickly. One bad headline that turns people's confidence in the other direction, and that makes them lose faith in our political overlords, which they should have lost a long time ago, and things can go very, very quickly. Okay, you're listening to the Peter Schiff Show, the gold standard in talk radio. When we come back, we're going to play some funny audio, inadvertently funny, get some commentary, and take more of your calls. 855-4-SCHIFF. See you in a minute. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Peter Schiff Show. I'm Tom Woods, in for Peter. I'm going to go back to the phones in a minute. First, I want to play you something. I think this is clip number 1. I want to play you, this is Jonathan Alter of Newsweek talking about the budget deal that was just passed and what a terrible, terrible thing it is. And, of course, he's right, it is a terrible thing, but not for the reason he thinks. Can we play clip number 1? I'm pretty sure it's clip number 1. We're going to find out, though.
After many years where Democrats kind of cried wolf about Republicans wanting to, throw Granny into the snow, this time that's what they have just voted to do.
Well, they threw Granny into the snow. So we've got a $3.6 trillion budget. We got a $1.65 trillion deficit. And, yeah, they are throwing Granny into the snow, of course, because on this path it'll be impossible to provide the health care that she's been expecting in the years to come. But this is because of the so-called $38 billion in cuts. $38 billion in cuts! This is Granny being thrown into the snow. $38 billion is I always say it's like 10 cents off a trip to the moon. And in fact, it's even less than that, because here I have in my hand an article that you can find on CBSNews.com that tells us that the $38 billion this year, it actually amounts to $352 million. So even the $38 billion, which is a scam in itself, it turns out that we don't even get $38 billion. So let me read from the article. A study from the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office confirms that the legislation does indeed cut that much from what federal agencies are authorized to spend this year. But the study reveals that it will only amount to a reduction of $352 million in non-war government spending for the rest of this fiscal year. That's in part because a significant portion of the cuts come from authorized funds that won't be spent immediately, such as water and sewer grants. The budget makes about $8 billion in immediate cuts to domestic programs and foreign aid, but those are offset by defense spending increases. So spending as much as the rest of the world put together is not quite enough. On top of that, when war funding is considered, federal spending will actually increase by $3.3 billion compared with current levels. And finally, additionally, as the Washington Post reports today, about $8.6 billion in the budgetary reductions come from, in quotes, cutting funds that might never have been spent in the first place. Those funds, accounting over 20% of the so-called cuts, only existed as IOUs to agencies that may or may not have been cashed in. Well, there you go. We're throwing Granny into the snow. What else can one say? Are you guys on the phones? You've been very, very patient. Let's see. Let's go to Nathaniel in Pittsburgh. Nathaniel, you are on the Peter Schiff Show.
Hi, Dr. Woods.
Hi. Sorry to keep you so long. Just hard to get everybody in here.
Sure, no problem. My question was related to the 70s and 80s. We had a lot of inflation in the U.S., and then the history that I've heard is that Paul Volcker came in and raised the interest rates, and, yeah, there was a little depression or whatever, but we got back on track and inflation dropped. Is that something that you think could happen this time around? Could somebody at the Federal Reserve get a spine and come and say, hey, we're gonna stop this from becoming a complete catastrophe?
We can't rule anything out. It does seem like, a lot of people think if only we get rid of Bernanke. Well, the people who would follow Bernanke are all exactly of like mind. So I don't see a Volcker on the horizon. But on the other hand, I am rather inclined to accept Gary North's analysis of the situation, which is that the Fed, by and large, does not want to go down in history as the institution that created the great hyperinflation. They are likely to stop well short of that. And they are likely, because their pensions are denominated in dollars after all. And he thinks the likely outcome is that at some point, and the Fed has been warning about this obliquely in, occasional obscure speeches by Bernanke, but what would likely happen is that the Fed would say to the Treasury, look, you know what, we've been more than accommodating up to now. We've done this and that. We bent over backwards for you, but you know what? Now you're on your own. Now that's it. You got to sink or swim on your own. And then at that point, the Treasury decides what it wants to do. But the Fed will not necessarily follow it over the cliff. So that could well happen. We could well see that. I don't know exactly when, and Bernanke has warned that it would happen at some point, but nobody really knows. I think that's the likely scenario that could unfold. I was talking about Webster Tarpley, so in fairness, let me go to Austin, Texas, and Travis. Travis, you're on the Peter Schiff Show.
A couple of years ago, I discovered the Austrian school, and I can remember saying to myself, wow, this is what I believe. This is my philosophy. This is right down the fairway of what I believe. But like that last caller, I listened to GC and host Webster Tarpley, and there really is an ounce of truth to what he said. And so I find myself a little bit conflicted. And I've heard Max Kaiser before describe a society with a dual competitive cooperative model. And he describes it much more eloquently than I can. What are your thoughts on that, on constructing the country along the lines of a dual competitive cooperative model?
Well, I don't know the nature of such a model. I don't like the term constructing, because I just believe let people construct the communities they like. But if you can describe it for me in 30 seconds, I can give you some thoughts.
Well, I mean, Kaiser talks about France and how they very much have, an entrepreneurial society. They have, competitive companies, but then in times of strife or whatever, they put workers to work, cleaning the Louvre and doing public works projects and keep, 50,000 men employed. Doing projects like that. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, I think an easy way to tell, what side the Austrians are on is that everyone is dead set against them. Like all the bad guys, all the elites, they would rather see the country burn to the ground than see, Austro-libertarian ideas implemented. So that's how you know that you're on the right side. Now, in terms of what you're describing, well, obviously we all want to help people who are put out of work. I think the best way to deal with that, though, is to try to tame the business cycle in the first place so that people aren't thrown into this cycle of prosperity and despair and prosperity and despair. And that's where Tarpley and I would have a common ground, and that we both want to go after the Federal Reserve. I don't think he believes in or knows much about the Austrian business cycle theory, but if he's against the Fed, that's pretty good, and we can be against that for perhaps for different reasons. But that would be my first thing, is that we don't throw the people out of work in the first place. And then secondly, the public works programs, I think are, we all can think of examples where they've seen people through in hard times, but what they're doing is siphoning off resources from the private sector, and that's even true even with the Keynesian argument that the resources are idle. They're always necessarily pulling them from somewhere that they would have gone otherwise. And so we don't see all the enterprises that are hurt and damaged and people who are thrown out of work because we've rearranged resources in order to fund these other programs. I mean, I don't envy the economic performance of France or a lot of these European countries. We'd be a lot better off if we had a less crony capitalist, more genuine free market society. Everybody would be wealthier. There's no greater engine of wealth that's ever been seen in the history of the world than the genuine free market. Well, we are coming up on the end of our time, which is astonishing to me. It's like we just got here like 5 seconds ago, and now we're just about to end. My thanks to my guests, C.J. Maloney and Robert Wenzel. Check out C.J.'s book, Back to the Land, and check out Bob's website, economicpolicyjournal.com. Hope you can also pay me a visit over at tomwoods.com. And I will perhaps be seeing you again sometime in the future, but this has been great fun. I'm sorry for the calls I wasn't able to get to. Well, hang on. We'll try and see. I expect to be back on Wednesday, so we'll try and do them then. But thank you very much, everybody. It's been great fun. You have been listening to The Peter Schiff Show, which is, as we know, the gold standard in talk radio. Thank you all so much.